Our percentage of power consumption offset. Are you actually saving money? Are you able to sell money back to the grid? Who was the installation company? What brand is this system? How efficient is it? Is there a warranty? Is the warranty transferable? How long do these systems typically last? Is there a battery system? Is there financing? Is there leases? Are those transferable? One of the other things that I had a student bring up to me as well, which is just another added layer of complexity that sometimes we don't think of. When you're selling power back to the grid, there's a lot of paperwork when somebody takes that over. And so that's a consideration. Your buyers have to fill out this paperwork. It has to get transferred over. There's, a lot of different pieces here. So there is no one size fits all. The other real big consideration that I would say, folks, this is kind of like developers of like the 1990s who would come and they would build a subdivision and they would not record a road maintenance agreement, and then they would file bankruptcy and they would disappear off the face of the earth. And so you really couldn't go after them. Well, the same thing's true of these solar panel companies. Some of them showed up, popped up, went around door knocking, sold to as many people as they possibly could, and then they disappeared off the face of the earth. And so that's a big consideration. Is the company that installed them still around? Were they a reputable company to begin with? So a lot of different pieces to this solar panel discussion. And as I stated, a lot of things linked into the materials on this. I will say several months ago, I taught this class and I had a student in who was a friend of mine, and he reached out after class and he said, wow, that was really helpful. We started talking about solar panels because I just had my first listing with solar panels, and I was actually able to pull through some of the resources and have some more insight and information as to what maybe I should ask and look for. So if you ever have one come up, definitely good to look back at the resources. Here's the next one for solar panels. When solar panels are financed, this document would represent a lien on the property. Teresa, what you think?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. If they're leased, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is true, but do you know the specific name of the document that would indicate that they were leased and not owned?
Oh, the lien would be a mechanic's lien, I would think.
Mechanic's lien would be a possible, but there is one others. Michael, what do you think?
What is a UCC filing?
There you go. Folks, what is a UCC1 financing statement, or UCC filing, as Michael said? If you don't remember, the UCC in North Carolina is the Uniform Commercial Code, which basically states, and this is a pre-licensing concept that we still teach our licensees as they come through. What it basically states is if there's somebody who had something that would normally be real property, right? It's attached, but there is a creditor with a security agreement against it because it's not paid off, it would remain personal property that can be removed if not paid off in full. And so this UCC1 financing statement would be something that would show up, obviously, as a consideration if these solar panels are not owned outright. So having somebody just show up one day and rip them off the roof would be a consideration if you didn't pay this off at closing. Now, Arnold also put in the chat as a private message, but that is a really good point, and this is one of the reasons why I don't necessarily love the idea of solar panels. Roof replacement is a very big consideration. If you've got a 27-year-old roof and you install solar panels, somebody should slap you, because that means in 3 years or less, you're going to have to take them off, change your roof, put them back on. What's the cost? Who's going to do it? Does it void the warranty, right? All of these things are considerations as well. So absolutely a thing. So there was a legal Q&A put out by NC Realtors on whether or not the seller is required to pay off the loan on their solar panels. Spoiler alert, it's not required, but it's a conversation we have to have on, is it going to happen or is it not? And of course, yet again, for listing agents, ask questions. Make sure you get all the information, make sure you know the company, make sure you get all the details, make sure you advertise them appropriately, and you do not misrepresent things. For the buyer's agent, same thing. Ask questions, get all the information. Folks, I'm going to go ahead and put some insight here, and this is going to give you a really big hint to the answer to the next question. If you are a buyer's agent helping a buyer purchase a home with solar panels, you should be asking for all the information, listen to me, very early on in the transaction? That's what I'm going to say. There's your hint to the answer to this next question. Or answer, should I say. You give me the question, right? It's Jeopardy. What is the time when a prospective buyer should be provided with details about solar panels? Teresa, what you think?
Very early on in the transaction.
Very early. How early? What time frame?
I would say upon initial questioning, I would think you would tell them.
So before you do what?
Anything. I would tell them. I mean, I think that's a huge thing.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Solar panels.
I agree. Heather, what do you think? What do you want to add there? You want to add something, Heather? No, you're good. No, you're good. She's like, no. Yeah, I'm good. Reagan, you want to add anything?
I would say they should be notified definitely before anybody makes an offer, but I would think that would be included in like the MLS documents.
Yeah, let's combine those two, folks. Early on means before you make an offer. I cannot stress this enough, because if you make an offer and you get under contract and you have 500, 10,000, I don't know, but if you have any amount of due diligence on the line and now you're in your due diligence period and then you find out about solar panel stuff and then your buyer can't buy it because their debt to income ratios are off or it's upside down on the loans or whatever, you've now wasted their due diligence money. Folks, there are so many things that I am starting to lean towards. We should figure these out before we ever make an offer. Solar panels is one of them. I'm going to give you two others, in my opinion, that we should always be doing before we submit the offer. Number one is restrictive covenants. If you look on the standard form 2T, it says part of the due diligence, review bylaws and restrictive covenants. Do not wait till you're under contract. If my client needs chickens, I need to look up if they can have chickens before I submit an offer. If they're trying to operate a home business, I need to look up and see if they can do that before I submit an offer. Otherwise, I'm a dingleberry with a capital D. You know what I'm saying? But here's one that is a newer interpretation that I would suggest to all of you folks. And I'm sure you are the best and brightest out there, and so please don't take this as like me trying to tell you what to do or what not to do. But here's what I think is going to be a much more prevalent thing going forward that we should all do as buyer's agents. I think we should start, and this is a segue to the next section, I think we should start getting insurance quotes on the property before we submit an offer. Because insurance is going nuts. And not all homes are insurable, and not all insurances are affordable. And it is very easy to call up your insurance company and give them the street address and get a quote just like that. That's it. So here's the reason why I'm saying this. Imagine yet again, you help a buyer get under contract on a home, and during your due diligence period, you call up Progressive or State Farm or whoever your insurance company is, and they say it's going to be $10,000 a year for homeowners insurance. That yet again is going to be affecting their pity payment. That's going to affect their debt to income ratios, and your buyer may or may not qualify. And even if they do, they may not want to buy a house where the insurance is $10,000 a year. And the insurance companies are going nuts. They are balking at 10-year-old roofs, 15-year-old roofs. They are raising the rates astronomically high. So while it's not a legal requirement to get an insurance quote before you submit an offer, I would argue, in my opinion, it should be a consideration, especially as we move forward with these insurance issues. David says, would it be reasonable to inquire from the seller about insurance? You mean as like a listing agent? Yeah, I think it absolutely would be part of that discover and disclose. And I think because we're going to see more and more insurance issues, I would guess the commission would crack down on this too. So how much is your homeowner's insurance? Are there any major claims on it? Would be very reasonable questions, I think, as a listing agent that would potentially be material facts for disclosure. Absolutely. So we've already answered this one, right? Prior to submission of an offer is when we need information on the solar panels. And right now, my friend Teresa's still rocking and rolling, but y'all are all winners in my book because you're getting Bicup done in January. Whoop, whoop. And so, nice little segue that I just gave you to insurance coverage. So, insurance coverage for 100 folks. A recent activity of North Carolina Department of Insurance of which brokers should be aware. And you can call it whatever you want as long as you know what it is. Hal, what you think?
Increase in insurance rates.
There you go. What is a proposed rate hike, folks? The Department of Insurance had proposed a rate increase of like 400% or some astronomical number like that. It was insane. And the Department of Justice looked at them and said, nope, that's too much. And of course, they approved like a 40% increase. So insurance is going up across the board in every state. Now, I taught a post-licensing class last night, and I had a student bring this up. She said, well, I was wondering if we could talk about, I read an article from some economists that stated that because of the insurance issues, that they were going to have a housing market crash. And I said, well, there's a lot of people speculating that. Is it going to be across the board? No. But in areas that are very prevalent to insurance issues, your coastal areas with the hurricanes in Florida, the coastal areas in North Carolina, there is major discussions about insurance going through the roof. And of course, why would that cause a housing crisis? If your insurance was $6,000 a year and it becomes $25,000 a year, that house may not be as affordable anymore. And so the speculation is when that happens, a lot of people are going to sell these houses and offload them, which is going to cause the values to drop because supply and demand. There's too many houses and people not wanting them because of the insurance issues. Folks, we can all agree that insurance payouts are probably the highest they've ever been in the United States in the past year. Between California, between Florida, between Western North Carolina, there are billions, if not trillions of dollars worth of damages, and it's just going to continue to be an issue and a consideration. So insurance is a very complex thing. What you got, Teresa?
Just a question or something I've heard that you may know the answer if it's accurate. I heard the reason for the huge rate increase in the homeowners insurance is that the insurance commission was prevented from a rate increase for several years due to the pandemic. And now they've finally allowed them a rate increase, so they're trying to catch up. Have you heard anything to that effect?
I haven't heard that specifically, but that wouldn't surprise me. If you think about the pandemic, there was a giant moratorium on evictions and a giant moratorium on foreclosures. And so the federal government kind of mandated that, certain institutions could not make people homeless due to these things.
Right.
And so I would wager that that might have been part of it because
Right. Okay.
obviously everybody was in a hard way. So it sounds valid. I cannot say with absolute certainty that that's what happened,
Right. Okay.
but it would make sense. Yeah, for sure. So here's the thing, as I said, folks, we are supposed to be kind of knowledgeable about a lot of things, but we're not the experts. And so you need lending friends who are the experts on lending. You need insurance friends who are experts on insurance. It's always good to have a person to refer your clients to if they got specific questions. Now, there is this Consumer's Guide to Homeowners Insurance that's linked in the materials. It is put out by the North Carolina Department of Insurance, and it explains all the things that you would hopefully need to know, like coverage and liability and deductibles and exclusions and differentiations and policies. Because let's be completely honest, right? Insurance is one of those necessary evil things as an adult that we all kind of understand it. But like, if you gave us a test on it, we'd probably all fail miserably, right? Especially like medical insurance. And like, I don't cover, no, I don't know what that means. All right, no, okay. It's just one of those things that eludes a lot of people. So definitely always good to have a person that can help explain these things to you. And as I said, this Consumer's Guide to Homeowners Insurance is linked in here. Here is Insurance for 200. This report contains the claims history for a specific property. Hal, what you think?
A clue report.
There you go, Hal. Folks, what is a clue report? Clue report stands for Comprehensive Loss and Underwriting Exchange. Under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, every single one of you is judged based on your credit scores for financing. Well, you are also judged based on your insurance decisions under a clue report. And because of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, you are allowed to see what's on your clue report. But you may not realize, just like you folks have a clue report, so does real property. And that's where I kind of gave you the hint earlier on, we should probably start calling and getting quotes before we make an offer. Why? Because, folks, is a person, if you get into a lot of car accidents or have a lot of speeding tickets, your insurance is going to go way up, and or they're going to pull a Snoop Dogg and drop you like you're hot. And the thing is true about houses too. If there is a lot of claims against a specific piece of property, sometimes they consider that a higher risk and or uninsurable. And so imagine being a buyer under contract to buy a house, and during your due diligence, you were told, we will not give you insurance on this house. Folks, I don't know about you. I don't have $600,000 in cash I'm willing to burn if my house burns down to buy a new one. So I need insurance on my house, and if I can't get it, I don't want to buy that house. So definitely a big consideration with all these insurance changes. I told you, these insurance companies are getting crazy. Like, they are really freaking out about roofs that are 10 years old. Even with 30-year shingles, they're like, your roof's 10, and it's going to be an extra $16,000 a year just because of that. It's nuts. So comprehensive loss and underwriting exchange. A lot of things come into play with clue reports. The areas, crime rates, previous claims, condition and age of home, flood certifications, elevation certifications, everything in between. So lots of different pieces there. And if you don't understand this, like I said, get an insurance friend. As long as you're referring the business, they will have lunch with you, and they'll tell you everything that you need to know about insurance. You know how this works. All right, we got lender friends, we got insurance friends, we got home inspector friends. That's how it works. Here is insurance for $300. Separate deductibles and policies are usually necessary to cover these two events. Teresa saw your hand first.
One would be flood.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say wind, but I don't think that's accurate.
But we'll take it. Hal, you want to supplement that at all?
I was going to say earthquakes.
Could be in some states, right? Yeah. Heather, you agree with what they said?
I was going to say flood, wind, and hail.
Yeah. We can kind of group all those together. Michael, what were you going to say?
I was going to say mold.
Well, mold potentially too. That can sometimes be a separate policy as well. All great answers. Folks, you hit it. I was looking for flood and storm, which would be the wind and hail and stuff like that. So now understand, flood insurance is a separate policy. Storms are covered under a lot of HO3 policies, but sometimes have separate deductibles and separate limitations and things of that nature. And so definitely consideration. Now, I will tell you what was surprising to me, and I had a student tell me this. They said that a couple months before the Western North Carolina devastation and hurricane, the North Carolina head honcho of the Department of Insurance actually in an interview stated, and I didn't vet this, but I had some students tell me they saw it, stated that every single person in North Carolina should have flood insurance. Which is very surprising because most of us are like, well, if we're not in a floodplain, why do we need flood insurance? But he said that every single person in North Carolina needed flood insurance. Now, it could have just been a subsidiary thing, right? Like, the more people who are buying it, the more affordable it is. Maybe he gets bonuses. Could just be that. It could have also been a little foreboding of like, hey, a couple months before this big natural disaster, that's definitely not something the government did or anything like that, right? We're going to, I don't know if you're into conspiracy theories in any way, shape, or form, but there's all kinds of them floating around. Now, folks, when we're dealing with floods, you would have never thought somewhere like Western North Carolina would have had these landslides and these hurricanes and the floods that they did. You expect it from places like coastal North Carolina. And so the Real Estate Commission is always putting out resources for us and the public, and they have a lot of them as question and answers brochures is what they call them. And there's one on purchasing coastal real estate North Carolina. So if you're doing business in that area, there's this pamphlet that's available for you to provide that helps them understand insurance is high, flood insurance is required in a lot of these areas. It's going to continue to go up. It's not if, it's when, so on and so forth. So this is a reason why you need to have a very specific geographic level of competence in whatever area you're in. Definitely a consideration. And that manual is linked in the materials also. How about this one for floods? For insurance. Flood certifications required by lenders are based on these. What you got, Teresa?
Sure, this one, maybe the flood map.
Flood maps put out by who?
FEMA.
FEMA. There you go. Come on, then. FEMA. It is. I like it, folks. The FEMA Federal Flood Maps. FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Administration. And here's the thing. FEMA is the one that writes the flood maps. By the way, the flood maps in North Carolina have been rewritten like 8 times in the past 6 years. Or actually more like 10 years, should I say. 8 times in the past 10 years. After Hurricane Matthew, after another big hurricane, after some other stuff, they've redrawn these flood maps. Now, by the way, if you go to your GIS map in your county, GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems, there are floodplain overlays in your GIS map. Here's the thing, they are not regularly updated. Last time I checked Wake County, the most recent flood map was from 2018. The FEMA flood maps are different. You cannot rely on the GIS map for absolute accuracy. Lenders are basing their decisions on FEMA's maps. FEMA.gov, you can go to their website, you can put in addresses, you can see all these different things. And understand too, when it comes to floods, floodplains, there is some differentiations in the different ratings of the floodplains. And then of course, what we call the NFIP, which is the National Flood Insurance Program. Some areas are federally required to have flood insurance. Some are not, but your lender is probably going to always require you to have flood insurance if any portion of the property is located in a FEMA designated floodplain. So definitely a consideration, and some places were condemned by the government after Hurricane Matthew because they were not in a floodplain before, and then they were after. So like, we're not even going to let you rebuild this house. FEMA has some different articles. Know your flood risk, homeowners, renters, or business owners. Of course, all great resources to share with your clients if there's ever a consideration for a floodplain. Still leading, my friend Teresa, but y'all are all winning in my heart, as I said. Last category here for Jeopardy, let's put a bow on this thing, is airports. Here is airports for 100. Federal law requires the FAA to make maps available regarding this aspect of airports. Arnold saw your hand first. Oh, make sure you unmute. There you go.
Runways.
Runways is a consideration. There's other things too. Christiana, what do you want to add to that?
Flight paths, maybe?
Flight paths, runways, absolutely. Reagan, what do you want to add to that?
I was going to say the same thing as flight paths, but I believe there's like a sound and noise layer.
There you go. Folks, the runways and the flight paths are the issues because of noise. Airplanes are good. Noise, bad, right? The technology is amazing that you can hop on a plane and you can go to the other side of the world in hours, which is pretty fantastic. But these big turbines typically are flying around the speed of sound and they create sonic booms. They have a lot of noise. And so being in a flight path or being near an airport can cause what we would refer to as noise pollution, which would be a material fact. This would fall into that second category, facts relating directly to the property. Trains would also fall into these categories, right? Landfills, things that are out exterior from the home, but still affect a reasonable person's decision to buy, sell, or lease. So noise. Now, there is lots of information on airports and considerations from this topic from the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration's website, linked in your materials. Of course, some areas are more prone to these discussions than others, obviously, depending on if you have an airport or not, or if you're close to one. Here is airports for 200. Questions about commercial noise are posed to the seller in this required form. I joked with my class last night that the sole reason I grew a beard was because I asked open-ended questions, and I'm just like, well, I'm waiting for you to answer. It's lying. That's not the reason I did it. But it's very useful for that. I can just sit here and just, while I wait for y'all to answer. Let me give you a hint. Yeah, there you go. Sue? Heather, what were we going to say?
The residential property and owners association disclosure statement.
You know, you get extra points for giving the actual full legal name of it. I have not heard any students call it that in forever. Because we love our little acronyms. We just call it the RPODs.
Okay.
RPODs. No, you're absolutely right. It is the Residential Property and Owners Association Disclosure Statement, but we always call it, some people pronounce it RPODs. I always say RPODs, but because we love to shorten things out, but that's it. The disclosure form, the RPODs form. Folks, we're going to talk about the RPODs a little bit later in some different discussions today as well, because if you're not aware, hopefully you are, it changed last year. Not significantly, but it did change, and you should have been using the new one as of July 1st of 2024. Here is airports for 300. These specific maps regarding airport noise are helpful for disclosure. And if you know the specific name of this, I would just be surprised. Jenna's like, don't worry, I don't. It's okay. Folks, let me help you out here. It is called a composite noise contour map. Basically, they're flight path maps, and they have decibel ratings on them, so you can kind of look and see what your anticipated decibel rating is in a given area, a given flight path. True story, had some clients I helped buy a house a couple years ago during kind of the crazy market of the COVID times, and they were in California, and so they would fly out here, we'd find a house, we'd put in an offer, we lost a couple bids on because everything was multiple offer situations, and so they just started sending me. They're like, we can't fly back every single time. So I started going to these houses, and they found one that they loved. It checked all the boxes, and I went there, and I looked at it, and I did a video tour with them, and they loved it. But then I had to send them this flight path map because, folks, listen, in my younger years, not now, right now, I dislocated my shoulder a few years ago. Not now, but in my younger years, I could have picked up a rock and probably hit an airplane. That's how close it was to RDU International Airport, okay? And so I sent them this map, and they're looking at it, and they're like, oh, this many decibels, it seems kind of loud. And so then I went back another day, and I just sat there, and I recorded the flying, and they're like, nope. So these maps are very useful to give somebody some inclination as to what they may expect if they're in these flight paths or nearby. It's called a composite noise contour map. Last one here. Homeowners near airports receive these documents from nearby airport authorities. And yet again, if you know the exact name of this, I'd be surprised. But I'll pause for dramatic effect just in case. All right, let me help you out. What is an aircraft noise notification? Whoop, whoop. Folks, that is Jeopardy. And we're going to say Teresa brought the house down, okay? Teresa rocked and rolled on this one, but some of y'all were close seconds. And as I said, you're all winners in my book because you're getting Bicup done in January instead of June. And I thank you, and the commission thanks you as well. So, let's get into our next fun-filled discussion. Folks, hang tight here. Let me give you a little bit of insight into this next one. Last year, the North Carolina Real Estate Commission introduced a segment on frequently asked questions, meaning questions they get as the commission every single year. And I think they had this epiphany. They said, well, you know, if we're getting all these questions of people wanting to know this, maybe we should just share all this information with the public in the annual update course to hopefully minimize the amount of questions they have. So they brought this section back. So it's going to try to play the the introductory video again. I'm going to skip that because we don't need that whole thing again. So skip. And so this is not a game that you're familiar with. This is a game that is made up by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission called Answer the Call, dealing with the frequently asked questions the commission gets. So here is your introductory video to this segment.
It's time to play. answer the call. In this segment, you will answer actual calls to the commission. Pick a student to keep score. You will receive $100 for the first correct response and $50 for correct additional details. Let's play.
So this whole section is just going to discuss different things the commission gets asked and they want you to know. Now, before we get into this section, let me tell you why I think this section exists. Folks, here's some interesting things, okay? First and foremost, hopefully you are all aware that if you want to correspond with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, you got 3 ways to do it as a licensee. Of course, you can go on their website and interact with all the forms and different things there. You can email them, and there's several different email directories depending on who you're looking for. And you can always call the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Now, on the website, they've actually introduced a chatbot they refer to as Alfred. If you look in the bottom right corner, there's a little icon. Personally, I haven't played around with it much, but it hopefully is a very useful tool, kind of like the DMV has. It's supposed to integrate with your records and be able to answer basic questions. So, kind of cool that the Real Estate Commission is getting into the 21st century, as we say. Now, here's my real theory as to why this section exists. And we gave you this metric last year, too. But the true story, every single day, the North Carolina Real Estate Commission gets about 1,000 emails and 500 phone calls a day. Folks, that's a lot, okay? If I remotely had to answer that many emails and phone calls a day, I just don't think I want to do it anymore, okay? Like, I'm not going to get dark here, but I might just move to the middle of nowhere, buy a plaid shirt and an axe, and just be a lumberjack, all right? Just let my beard get a little fluffier and longer. Everything will be okay. I don't want to do it anymore if I get that busy. Now, when you reach out to the Real Estate Commission, you're talking to one of 2 different departments. Licensing services, which is who you would be talking to if you were talking about your license status. What classes you need to take. Did you get credit for your class? How do I find my pocket card? How do I do my background check? How do I schedule my licensing exam? So on and so forth. That would be license services. Of course, the other side is regulatory affairs. You are facing a disciplinary action. You got a letter of inquiry. You're doing an audit. You need a law explained. You have a contract question. All of these things are regulatory affairs. And so when you call the commission, they're going to ask how they can direct your call. And you'll either get a person or leave a voicemail. And they typically get back to you pretty fast. So the reason why I think this section exists is they're probably trying to lessen that number of 1,500 pieces of correspondence down a little bit. So like maybe if we answer these questions in bulk, they'll stop calling us. Like never stop calling them because that's what they're there for. But I'm sure that there is just so much correspondence that they're like maybe it'll be less. Now here's the thing. I'm going to warn you about something, and this is just me poking fun and making jokes as I like to do, so you're not bored to death in this class. Folks, the Real Estate Commission really has come into the 21st century. And so their videos are created using AI, which is super cool that they're using AI and they're taken to that. But here's my word of caution about the AI videos, folks. Some of them are fine. But because they're using AI avatars in these videos, some of them look like a 1990s Jackie Chan movie. You know what I'm talking about? He recorded them in Chinese and they were dubbed in English, and so the mouths and the words, they just don't match up. Okay, so just mentally prepare for a little bit of Jackie Chan dubbing from these AI people, all right? But they're still good videos. They're very useful, but you're going to see what I mean. Some of them are worse than others. So here's how we play this game, folks. You're going to get a video. Somebody's calling the commission, ask a question, and if you know the answer, raise your hand just like last time, and you are going to answer this person's question as the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Now, understand the commission would never just answer with a yes or no, so I need a little more details. So here is your first scenario.
Thanks for calling the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. How may I help you?
I have some questions that I need to ask, but the last time that I called, the person I spoke with would not provide information unless I gave them my license number. I don't want to do that. I think you are just trying to catch me doing something wrong so you can initiate a complaint against me. How many calls can I make before you do that? Are you putting me on a list or something? Why do you want my license number anyhow?
Okay, first and foremost, before any of you try to answer, this homeboy seems guilty, okay? He's very, very suspect, right? He's like, why do you want my license number? Why are you asking for that? What are you trying to put me on a list or something? So he seems very guilty. But that aside, folks, who wants to help me out as the commission? What do you think the answer is here? Somebody help me out. Calls the commission, says, why do you want my license number? What you think, Heather?
To be able to look for your actual license record for accuracy in the response, to create a record of the phone call, and to document the discussion.
Nailed it. Beautiful. 100 fictitious dollars for you, Heather. Thank you. Folks, anybody want to supplement that? Everybody feel pretty good with Heather's answer? Here's the thing. When you call the real estate commission, if you are a licensee and you're asking about your license, your status, how do you fix it, they can't tell you if they don't know who you are. So they need your license number to look up your record. But here's the thing, too. They do keep very detailed records of the phone calls. Everything you asked, everything you talked about, and what you were told. But it's not to get you in trouble. It's the opposite. It's to protect you. Folks, if you call the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, you say, here's what I got going on. And they say, here's what you need to do. If you go out and you do what they tell you to do, and some way, somehow, a complaint still gets filed against you, and they look back in the records and they told you to do that, it's going to protect you. Folks, if the commission said do this, and you did, they can't come after you for it. So they keep very detailed records of everything that they told you to do and what you ask. And folks, when I say they keep detailed records, I mean they keep very detailed records. Before we started class today, a fellow instructor and friend of mine called me, and we were having discussions on, different nerdy education things just before I started teaching you. But it's funny because she told me a story one time because she does training courses for a big brokerage firm. And she calls the commission a lot. And so we have some friends at the commission level. And she called up there and she asked a question. And she's like, hold on, let me pull up your record. And here's what they told her. They're like, oh my God, you call up here a lot. Because they have notes of every single, and they were joking because it was a friend, but they have the records of every single phone call she's ever made to the commission and every question. So it is very detailed records. But it is not to hurt you, it is to help you. So do not ever be afraid of that. Now, here's one more funny story. I want you to listen to this. This is true. If you're not familiar, last year in the videos that we had in the update course, Kizzy Crawford was the very fancily dressed woman who was always in most of the videos. And she is the Assistant Director of Licensing and Education at the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. And she is a very sharp lady, a very brilliant educator, and an attorney by trade. And occasionally the management staff at the commission will sit on the phones and answer the calls just to see what kind of calls are coming through. True story. She said last year she had somebody call up there when she was sitting on the phones and answering these, and in no uncertain terms, they asked permission to commit fraud. Folks, that is a special kind of stupid. For the love of God, do not call the real estate commission and ask permission to commit fraud. Okay, so while they're not there to hurt you, they can't leave well enough alone if you call and ask something like that. And so I can almost guarantee she probably took a file folder after that phone call with this person's name on it, walked it down the hall to the auditing department and said, random audit of this broker on Tuesday. Okay, random. Right? Because they can't leave that alone. So don't call and ask to break the law with the commission. But it's okay to call them and ask questions. Here is your next fun-filled phone call to the Real Estate Commission.
Thanks for calling the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. How may I help you?
I was calling to see if you could help me. I found a webinar about the working with real estate disclosure on the Commission's website. I was thinking that it would be a great tool to use with my new brokers in an orientation that I do regularly. How do I get approval to use links or materials to Commission resources on my website or in communications to my brokers or my clients?
So this one's pretty straightforward. I was using some different materials and videos from the commission's websites and training. How do I get approval from the commission to continue to use these, right? To use these in discussions with clients, to use these in training exercises, all the commission resources. How do I get permission? Now, Heather, your hand's up, but I don't know if it's from before or not, so I don't want to put you on the spot. She's like, no, not this one, Seth. I'm out. What do you think here? Arnold, I saw your hand. Make sure you unmute for me, sir.
I think you could, if you have given them your license number and your license in North Carolina, and it's on their public website as a tool for you to look. I think you could share it with anybody in your company.
Yeah, I like that. Heather, is that you agree with Arnold? Yeah. Arnold, I'm gonna give you $100 fictitious, my friend. That is the correct answer. Listen, you can go out and you can buy yourself some fictitious margaritas later, Arnold. That's what's good about this fictitious $100, right? Folks, the thing is, the North Carolina Real Estate Commission is a governmental entity. It exists to protect the public in real estate transactions. Their resources are put out for the public. They are able to be used for the public. So you do not need permission to use anything that the commission provides. That's what it's there for. Now, the thing is, you cannot copyright it, right? You cannot steal it and claim it as your own, and you cannot change it without permission. Even these slides that I'm giving you folks, I'm not allowed to take anything out of these slides or add anything in unless I get permission from the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. So they're available for the public. Licensee, not licensee, you're welcome to use them. Just don't steal them. Just don't rebrand them. Just don't anything like that. Excellent. Here's your next fun-filled phone call to the commission.
Thanks for calling the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. How may I help you? Hi, I'm calling because my brother has asked for my help in collecting rent from his tenants, handling maintenance requests, and handling the payment for expenses associated with his property. I'm going to charge him for these services. I'm a CBA. Do I need a real estate license?
This is an interesting one. Teresa, what you think here? Oh, you're muted, Teresa.
I would say yes. I mean, yes, you absolutely do, because you're conducting property management. I would think you need a real estate license for sure.
Absolutely. I agree with you. $100 fictitious for Teresa. Anybody want to add anything supplemental to this? Folks, here's the thing. This comes down to General Statute 93A-1 and 93A-2. And we've always taught it in pre-licensing and post-licensing in a lot of CE classes in a way that's a little more straightforward than if you actually read the law. But what it states is anybody who does a brokerage activity, which we have always taught as the LL Beans acronym, just like the clothing company, but with an S. If you list, lease, buy, exchange, auction, negotiate, sell, that includes doing, offering to do, or referring to do these things. And it deals with real property for others for compensation, a license is required. So this lady is doing leasing activities, which is an LL Beans activity. She is leasing real property for her brother, getting paid. Real property for others for compensation. She needs a license. And so what she is doing is illegal brokerage activity, which the commission does have the ability to go after her for. It is a Class 1 misdemeanor to violate license law because it is North Carolina general statutes. Now, there are exemptions. Of course, personally owned properties. You can manage your own property without the need for a license, but this is not her home, it's her brother's. There is no exemptions for friends. There is no exemptions for family members. There is no exemptions for I only got $1 or I only got $2. There's none of that. If you're doing any of the triggering activities, no matter how little the money is, no matter who the person is, you need a license. One other exemption that is mentioned in the 93A-2 is, of course, hourly or salaried employees of a broker property manager. But it is not a full-fledged exemption. What we mean is a broker property manager managing a property legally, which is fine, we're licensed to do that. Their employees can do certain things, not all things. They can show properties for rent that are managed by their boss. They can collect rent checks, tenant security deposits, answer basic tenant questions, and provide pre-printed leases to the tenants. They cannot negotiate. They cannot show homes for sale. They cannot hold open houses. They cannot show other properties for rent that are not managed by their property owners. None of that. So very limited exemption. One last note is, of course, dealing with vacation rentals. The only reason this one comes up, we say that the employee of a broker property manager cannot negotiate, meaning if somebody is like, oh, $1,500 a month is too high, would you do $1,400? The employee can't do that. That would have to be the broker property manager. The exemption is vacation rentals because of seasonality. If there is a written schedule of price variations due to summer, winter, fall for seasonality, they could enact those for vacation rentals only as an employee of a property manager doing vacation rentals. Kind of an oddsy out there exemption, but it exists. Couple different things linked in the materials on unlicensed assistants, what they can and can't do. This is an ongoing struggle with the Real Estate Commission because there's a lot of unlicensed brokerage activity happening out there. Got time for one more phone call. Let's see what this one is.
Thanks for calling the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. How may I help you?
I am a broker in charge. I have never used unlicensed assistants in my office. One of my affiliated brokers wants to hire an unlicensed assistant. Because the affiliated broker is an independent contractor, I am going to require them to supervise and be responsible for anything improper that may occur with the unlicensed assistant. They are going to pay their assistant directly and be responsible for the training. If I get that agreement in writing, am I protected as the BIC?
What do you think here? Hal, I saw your hand. What are you thinking?
You cannot abdicate your responsibility as a broker in charge.
You cannot abdicate your broker or responsibility as broker in charge. 100 fictitious dollars for you, Hal. Absolutely. Folks, the thing is, it does not matter if he gets it in writing. He's the BIC. And he has a licensee. If he wants to absolve himself of any liability of potentially having unlicensed brokerage activities from somebody being an unlicensed assistant, then he should have a policy that states no unlicensed assistants. That's the only thing he can really do to protect himself. But if he's going to allow this person to have an assistant, then he is going to be responsible. And this is an actual thing that's happening, folks. Over the year, maybe even more, there has been disciplinary actions going against unlicensed assistants doing things they were not supposed to do. And while it may not normally be something that falls in the broker in charge's lap, the commission was constantly asking the question, did you have policies on whether or not they could have an unlicensed assistant? And if so, did you provide training? Did you follow up? Did you ensure that they were given the information? And if the answer was no to that, then BIC was also in trouble. So it is a good idea that if you're going to allow it, you set the standards, you have trainings, you have policies, they have signed them to protect yourself. Otherwise, the only thing you can do is say, no, you can't have them and ensure that they're not. So the broker in charge and the affiliated broker are both responsible for these unlicensed assistants. You can't absolve yourself. We just ended up with a phone call from the broker in charge who wanted to absolve himself of unlicensed assistants. We said no go on that. Of course, there is a lot of discussions happening around the broker in charge expectations, and they will continue to happen. I feel like there's going to be some rulemaking changes based on some of these discussions. So only time will tell exactly where those goes, but definitely a consideration. I think it's going to play some really, really loud music right here. There you go. Current leader is you're all winning in my book. Keep up the good work. Let's do the next phone call. Here we go.
Thanks for calling the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. How may I help you?
I just came from a listing appointment. The owner bought the home as a 3-bedroom home 5 years ago. They did a lot of remodeling and converted an upstairs attic area and a den into 2 bedrooms. Both rooms have a closet, exterior windows, and a door. Since they are using it as a 5-bedroom home, can I advertise it that way? I am looking for the commission rule on what constitutes a bedroom and I can't find it. Can you help me? What is considered a bedroom?
Who wants to tackle this one? Sue says permit required. What you think, David?
A heated space.
Heated space. That's going to be part of it, yeah. Christiana, you want to add something?
Well, I felt like there was a lot of stuff, but so they added 2 bedrooms, and then does that affect the septic tank? And did they permit it? And then is it heated? Is there a ceiling height requirement up there? I do commercial construction, so I'm not 100% sure, but if there's a ceiling height requirement and et cetera, et cetera.
Yep. All definitely good considerations. I like it. What do you think, Hal?
Well, basically, what was it permitted for? You can't change the permit unless they made some other concessions. Or it may be on septic. If it's got a septic system, what was it permitted for?
Yeah. I think that's absolute consideration as well. Folks, everything that y'all said tracks with me. Now, let me just provide some clarification, okay? The question that she's asking is, well, what's the commission rule on bedrooms? Folks, there is no commission rule or North Carolina general statute that is a blanketed definition of a bedroom. And so we always end up having a lot of conversations here. So let me clarify the first thing. A lot of students will bring in, heated and, ceiling height and stuff like that. Now, that stuff is all part of the residential square footage guidelines on whether or not it can be considered heated living space per the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Has to meet 3 basic criteria: heated by a permanent heat source, finished with like finishes to the rest of the house, and directly accessible from other heated living area. That is square footage guidelines. Now, when it comes to bedrooms, the general interpretation historically, and hang tight if you don't like what I'm saying, I'm going to amend it. Historically, people have always said, oh, well, a bedroom has to have two forms of ingress and egress and a closet. That's what they historically said, meaning has to have a door, a window, and a closet. Now, that interpretation is outdated. Why? Because it's not very fair to require a closet. There are plenty of homes that were built in the early 1900s that did not have closets. It was not an architectural norm back then. And so it wouldn't be fair for all these homes to be considered 0-bedroom dwellings because they didn't have a closet. So closets are not required. But the ingress and egress is a general understanding for a bedroom. Now, to everybody's point, permitting is a consideration. Every municipality has its own standard on what they would classify as a bedroom. And when this house was built or these rooms were finished, did they apply for the permit that met the criteria of whatever the local municipality stated was a bedroom? So there's consideration number 1. Consideration number 2 is, of course, sewer versus septic, as you folks said. Folks, if you're on sewer, it's pay per flush. You can call it as many bedrooms as you want as long as they are permitted. It doesn't matter. Now, when you're on septic, septic has a separate permit, and that permit is per bedroom because it's based on double occupancy. If you're on a 3-bedroom septic, the assumption is 6 adults could live in that house and it would probably keep up. Your system would. So it's based on bedrooms, not bathrooms. So if we had a scenario, and this is, folks, I live in a house exactly like this. My house has 6 rooms, and all of them have windows, doors, and closets except for one. But my house has a 3-bedroom septic permit. And so as a real estate broker, when I go to sell this house, I have to advertise it as a 3-bedroom, 3-bonus room house. Or heck, I could get creative and say 3-bedroom, a bonus, a media, and a playroom. But I cannot advertise that as anything more than a 3-bedroom house. Now, do understand that septic permits can be updated as well. Sometimes all you have to do is call the planning board or the county environmental department. And if your system's big enough, they may grant you a larger septic permit just on principle. Other times it involves getting a bigger tank and or adding more drain lines. But that is a very big consideration for that septic. The last consideration would be your MLS rules. Some MLSs have certain restrictions on what they consider to be a bedroom. But while there's a lot of facets to this, there is no one size fits all. There's no commission rule. There's no one statewide standard of what is a bedroom. Everybody with me on that? There you go. Realtor.com put out an article that's linked in here. Not that it's, the end-all resource, but on what the definition of a bedroom is. So it's definitely in the materials if you want to read into it. And of course, septic tanks, as we said, a lot of licensees have gotten in trouble for advertising this wrong. True story. A friend of mine who's gone through my post-licensing classes took my update course earlier this year. And we went over this. And it was an in-person class. And I pointed this out, and she's like, oh, Seth, help me look at this. So she had me she pulled up her listing, and we were looking at it together. And I'm like, oh, nope, here, let's go find the septic permit. I showed her where to find it. And I said, you got to change it because you have it as a 4-bedroom house. Your septic is a 3. So she had to change it right then and there. So this is very important stuff that the commission does crack down on. It'll get you in trouble. How about this fun-filled phone call.
Thanks for calling the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. How may I help you?
I am a listing agent. A previous potential buyer conducted a home inspection and then canceled the transaction due to financing issues. I have a second potential buyer for the property, and their buyer agent is insisting I give them the previous home inspection report. Do I have to comply with this request?
So, home was under contract. Buyers had an inspection. Apparently shared the inspection with the listing agent, then terminated the contract. Home is now under contract again, or potentially getting under contract. And the new buyers state, you have to give me the home inspection. What do you think, Teresa?
I'm not 100% sure, but I would think that you do, because anything in it could contain a material fact that you have to disclose if you know.
Yeah, there's a lot of material facts in there for sure. Definitely something to think about. Anybody want to add anything there? What you got, Christiana?
A question, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So, if someone else paid for that report and shared it with you, then, I mean, do you need their permission to release it? But, I mean, you could certainly release the material facts, but do you need permission to release the report if it was paid for by another prospective buyer?
So that's an excellent question. So let me give you the full all-encompassing answer, because that's exactly why I think this is coming up. Folks, historically, that has been a very large interpretation of this scenario. Because if the buyer pays for the home inspection, and then, of course, you release it to the seller, the question is, okay, well, we've always stated the buyer who paid for it owns it, and the home inspector owns it, and the listing agent does not have the right to disseminate it to the public. I will tell you that there was an interview or a Q&A with NC Realtors attorneys, and if I'm remembering correctly, their interpretation was that's not true. Once it has been shared with the sellers, it is no longer private property, and it can be shared with the general public, was the interpretation. Now, here's the thing. Here's my recommendation, folks. Is there a legal requirement to share that home inspection? No. The law does not require it. But because, as Teresa said, everything in there is potentially material fact, you've got to disseminate that information in some way, shape, or form. If you start copying, pasting stuff, or paraphrasing stuff, you open yourself potentially up to liability of getting it wrong or stating it indirectly or incorrectly. Here's my recommendation, and do with it what you want. If you are going to weigh the two outcomes of I didn't disclose everything and I'm potentially on the hot seat with the commission versus I shared the inspection report and the buyers are pissed about it, take the buyers are pissed about it. We're talking about a $500 home inspection, and they'd have to go to small claims court to do anything over it anyway, and they're probably not going to win because it was shared with them. But here's my recommendation. Do not post the home inspection in the public MLS, meaning where everybody can get it. You should potentially share it when somebody wants it. But I would suggest that you block out the names of the buyer and or maybe even the home inspection company just for confidentiality. Like I said, the NC Realtors Q&A said you can legally share it. But there is still plenty of buyers who have this inclination. Oh, no, I paid for that. That's mine. You can't share it. They feel like somebody owes them something. So I'm going to say it one more time. Are you legally required to share the home inspection? No. Are you legally required to give the material facts? Yes. Best practice, in my opinion, share the home inspection privately via email. Block out the names of the person whose it was initially. Do not put it in the MLS because you can rub people the wrong way. Everybody with me? So there's been a lot of really, really egregious disciplinary actions for this, because it's not that people have not been sharing the home inspection, it's they're not disseminating the material facts at all. So licensees let the home terminate, put it back on the market, don't disclose, gets under contract again, terminates, and they're losing their licenses. So don't ever do that. Make sure you get the information, but make your decision on sharing it. As I said, there is a Q&A put out on an inspection report, whether or not it's a material fact, and then of course the interpretation of who owns the inspection report, so on and so forth. Couple more phone calls to get through this section. Here's the next one.
Thanks for calling the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. How may I help you?
I am having trouble with a battle between a listing agent and the buyer I represent. My buyer wants to do additional inspections regarding a home. We are under contract. The listing agent told us that we cannot do any more inspections because our due diligence period has expired. They said anything we find out at this point would be irrelevant. Is it correct that my buyer can't do any more inspections?
So, is it correct that my buyer cannot do any more inspections on this property because we're past our due diligence period? What do we think here? What you got, Teresa?
I would think they have the right to do as many inspections as they want. However, the findings may not matter if they've passed their due diligence period.
There you go. I like that. 100 fictitious dollars for Teresa again. Folks, let me expand this a little bit. The first question we've got to answer, obviously, is was this transaction done utilizing the standard Form 2T? Because it's not a legal requirement to use the 2T. Could there be a potential for we used a contract that stated you couldn't do home inspections after a certain period? Maybe. It's possible. But as long as it's the 2T, folks, what the 2T states is that at minimum, the seller has to provide the right to conduct a due diligence, the right to verify repairs, and the right to conduct a final walkthrough. It says nothing about the fact that you can't do inspections after the due diligence period has ended. The problem, of course, is after your due diligence period has ended, your earnest money is on the line. So as Teresa stated, it might be a moot point. If you find issues and you want to terminate or you want to negotiate, you've lost your leverage because if there's any earnest money, you could lose it. Doesn't mean you can't. Folks, you absolutely can sign a DDRA after the due diligence period. The due diligence request and agreement can be signed after the due diligence period if everybody agrees to it. And I'll make one last note here, and y'all are obviously pretty sharp in this room, but let me just go ahead and make the statement. Hopefully you all realize in this room that if there's no earnest money negotiated on a 2T, then your due diligence date means nothing. It is a completely useless date. Because if you terminate with only due diligence during your due diligence period, all you've lost is your due diligence money. If you terminate after your due diligence date and there's no earnest money, you've still only lost your due diligence money. So if there is no earnest money negotiated on a contract, your due diligence date means nothing. Zero. Zip. Nada. Just there for looks. But can you continue to inspect stuff after the fact? Sure. Here is your next phone call. And if I remember correctly, this one is a Hot Mess Express. So pay attention.
Thanks for calling the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. How may I help you?
I want to know if you think I need to file a complaint against a listing agent. I represent a buyer who was interested in multiple properties. Because they were uncertain as to which one they wanted to move forward on purchasing, we did not tender any negotiated due diligence fee with our 2T offer to purchase and contract. More than one seller accepted. On the property the buyer chose not to buy, we sent a cancellation notice. Now the listing agent is threatening my buyer that if they don't pay, the seller is going to sue them. I think this is harassment. My buyer has a right to cancel. Now the listing agent isn't returning my calls. Can I file a complaint?
Folks, let's first, okay, before we go way down the rabbit hole with oh my god, the phone call is, can I file a complaint on the listing agent for harassment for threatening to sue my client in court? Just for funsies, let's answer that question first. Can this man file a complaint with the commission? Yeah. David's kind of like reluctantly shaking his head. Teresa, you agree?
Anybody can file a complaint.
There you go. Anybody can file a complaint. It doesn't mean that it's going to turn into anything. And let's be quite frank here. The listing agent has done nothing wrong. Okay, so the commission... In fact, what this guy really did was he told on himself, didn't he? Bless his heart. Folks, tell me the egregious mistake that our friend here has made. What you think, Teresa?
Not getting any due diligence.
Well, not he's the buyer's agent.
Oh, okay.
What do you think, Hal?
Not returning.
Yeah, you're good. Yeah.
Presenting two offers.
Presenting two offers could be a problem.
Usually it is.
Yeah. Folks, let me paint a very vivid picture here, because y'all got this, but you've got to understand the exact language and the circumstance. What happened here is this dingleberry of an agent suggested to his buyer client, let's submit two offers on two separate properties. Both were accepted. Both had negotiated due diligence fees, but they did not pay one of them because they said they didn't want to buy the house, so they terminated. And so this dingleberry agent gave this advice to his client and said, well, as long as we're not buying the house, they don't care. We can just terminate. We don't owe it. That's not how that works. Basic contract law dictates that the second this turns into a contract, you owe the seller the due diligence fee. No ifs, ands, buts, or coconuts. And so he was in breach of contract for failing to deliver it when they accepted it. Now, here's the really, really bad part. Folks, if you're not familiar with the language in the 2T to this extent, at the very top of page 2, there is a little excerpt that explains if you fail to deliver the due diligence money and or earnest money on time, the seller has to provide you with written notice of your failure to do so and give you only one banking day after that written notice to fix it and immediately available funds. And if you do not fix it with immediately available funds within 24 hours or one banking day, the seller can terminate the contract legally and be entitled to go after you for both the due diligence fee and the earnest money deposit. Both. More specifically, both. Like that one guy, like capital B, capital O, capital A, capital F. Both. Y'all seen that online? The guy on the football? Both. Or I like to spell it BOFFUM. Both of them. Folks, I want you to understand, if you had $1,000 in due diligence and $10,000 in earnest money, and then you don't pay the $1,000, this seller can go after you for $11,000 in court, and they will win, and you will also have to pay their court costs when you lose. By the way, do you remember earlier when I said this stuff is actually happening? Folks, this was a real disciplinary action last year. This agent cost their clients $26,000. Now, let me go back to what Hal said. Hal said you submitted two offers, and that's a problem. And I said, could be. Folks, if you look your client in the face and you explain the risks, that they could lose both the due diligence monies, and as long as they're willing to pay both due diligence monies, then it's not a problem. If your buyer wants to submit 6 offers simultaneously under the expectation that they could lose 5 due diligence fees when they only end up buying one house, there's legally no issue there. But this agent was in trouble because they did not explain. They made it sound like they were not going to be on the hook for this money. They absolutely were on the hook for this money. And so this agent was severely punished by the Real Estate Commission. That's a special kind of bless your heart, isn't it, folks? And in the South, we know what that means. Mm-hmm. What you got, David?
Well, I got a question, and I'm not just, I do commercials, so this is
Yep.
kind of my bailiwick. But I thought a contract was based on consideration, and if there was no money passed, then in effect you don't have a contract.
So the contract is based on consideration, but the consideration necessary to form the contract is the purchase price. Due diligence and earnest money are negotiating items. And so it doesn't have to be handed over consideration. It has to be stated consideration. So, David, just to that point, if I submitted an offer to you saying I was going to buy your house for $500,000 and I said $0 in due diligence, $0 in earnest money, and you accepted it, we have a contract because it has consideration on there. Purchase price for house. Due diligence and earnest money are not required as consideration.
Got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
And tendering it doesn't change anything with the validity of the contract either. It's the contract was formed, basic contract law, it's owed. Yeah, good question. Oh, bless. That's a special kind of one there. Of course, there's articles on due diligence fees and how they must be handled. This, I'm sure, is not the only agent who has ever screwed this up, but it is a very big consideration. Here is the next one. I promise just a couple more.
Thanks for calling the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. How may I help you?
I was calling because I want to know if I can help a family member. I am a sole proprietor unaffiliated with a broker in charge. My license is active. My sister wants to sell her house. Can I represent her in the listing, advertising, and marketing of her property?
What you think, Teresa?
You must be the broker in charge. I mean, she has to have broker in charge licensing, I would think.
You think she has to have broker in charge licensing to be able to do this?
Yeah, if she's just a broker, she can't.
Okay.
She needs a broker in charge for her sole proprietorship.
By the way, me not saying anything does not mean you're right or wrong. Sometimes I just like sit here awkwardly because I'm going to give you all the full piece of it in a second. Because you're onto something there, Teresa. I'm going to explain it. Christiana, what you think?
Well, this always confuses the heck out of me, honestly, but I feel like there's certain things she can do as a sole proprietor, but I think she's not supposed, I don't know if it's not supposed to advertise, but there's certain things that limit her as a sole proprietor, and I honestly don't remember what they are and find it really confusing.
Yeah. Let us shine some light on this, folks, because here's the thing. This is something that eludes a lot of real estate brokers, but those of us who are nerds and have to read the laws and the rules, I can explain it to you to the umpteenth degree. Folks, when you get your license in North Carolina as a provisional broker cannot be active unless they have a broker in charge. That's the only way to activate your license. However, when you move from a provisional broker to a full broker, after taking your post-licensing, a full broker can operate independently as a sole proprietor. That means they exist on their own with an active license with no firm and no BIC. But a sole proprietorship broker with no firm, no BIC, right, they are limited where they cannot do three things that would require a BIC. The three things they cannot do is one that you said, Christiana. They cannot advertise, they cannot have a trust account, and they cannot affiliate other brokers. So they are limited to unsolicited buyers and unsolicited referral fees. Because when I say they can't advertise, they are not allowed to advertise in any way, shape, or form. No business cards, no social media, no word of mouth advertisement. It's a pretty useless status for most people. Folks, why would this status be useful? If you were a broker for 35 years and you want to retire, but you want to still collect referral fees, you unaffiliate with a firm, you sit as a full broker, sole proprietor, and the people you've helped for the past 35 years call you up and they say, can you help me buy? You still can. You're an active broker. If they say, can you refer me out? You still can. You're an active broker. But in this particular scenario, she can do stuff with unsolicited buyers and unsolicited referral fees. But folks, she wants to list her sister's house. Well, guess what? Listing involves advertising. She cannot list a house in this status. She could help a buyer. She could collect a referral fee. She could refer to the listing. But folks, how are you going to tell the world you have a listing? Telepathy? 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,782 square feet, patio. Doesn't work. So there's the answer. A full broker, sole proprietor can be active without a BIC, but they cannot advertise their brokerage services in any way, shape, or form. If you want to advertise as a sole proprietor, you have to designate as a BIC of your sole proprietorship. And this is why most full brokers maintain affiliations with BICs and firms, because they're kind of useless on their own. Because I don't know about you, but I don't think most of us could have successful businesses without the ability to advertise in any way, shape, or form. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's one of those confusing things. It kind of sits out there in la la land. Just like you said, Christiana, you're not the only one that's like, I don't really remember. But you were on the right track. Yeah. I think I got like 2 more phone calls. Let's wrap this thing up and move on into some bigger and better things. Here is the last couple. Bam.
Thanks for calling the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. How may I help you?
I am a broker in charge and have served as the BIC for Enterprise Realty for the past 4 years. When I became the BIC and opened the trust account, I completed the Commission's 4-hour basic trust account procedures course. Do I have to retake that course every 3 years?
Now, this is something that you may or may not know, even though y'all are all BIC eligible brokers. If you don't have a trust account or maintain one, you may not know this, but I'll let you take a good old college try at it. What do you think here? What do you think, Teresa?
I would think you do because laws change. So I would think that you should stay updated unless they incorporate it in your BIC course. I mean, I'm not sure, but I really am not sure, but I would think so.
So the rule here is actually kind of interesting, folks. Obviously, you are all in here BIC eligible brokers, but you're not required to take this course unless you are maintaining a trust account, meaning you open one yourself or you take over one. And if you assume a trust account or open one, you have to take this course within 120 days of doing those. However, there is not a periodic requirement to retake the trust account course so long as you are maintaining that same trust account. If you haven't changed trust accounts, if you haven't moved to a different trust account, if you haven't opened a new trust account, you do not have to take this every 3 years. But let's say that you're the BIC of ABC Realty for 3 years managing their trust accounts. And then, after 3 years has gone by, you go to XYZ Realty and take over their trust account. Because you haven't taken this class within the past 3 years, you would have to take it again. So it's any time that you have changed supervision on different trust accounts and you've not taken it within the past 3 years. But it is not a periodic requirement to take it. And of course, if you're not familiar with the detailed trust account rules, they are 0116, 0117, and 0118 in the commission rules section. Outlines how you maintain them, ledgers, balances, what's okay, what's not okay, so on and so forth. And of course, articles linked to the material on trust accounts. And so, last couple, here's the next one.
Thanks for calling the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. How may I help you?
I am hoping you can help me with a tough decision. I previously listed a property at 123 Evening Star Drive. The property did not sell, and the listing expired 90 days ago. It is now relisted by another brokerage. I have a buyer interested in purchasing it. Do I have to keep my previous discussions with the seller when I represented them confidential, or must I share them with the buyer?
Interesting. So he was a listing agent, had to call him under contract, couldn't sell it, got fired. Now he has a buyer client who was interested in this home that he previously listed, but now it's listed with somebody else. So the question is, do I have to keep my conversations that I had with the seller confidential, or do I need to share that information with my new buyer? Great question, isn't it? It is a good question. Reagan, what do you think?
I would assume that if there were any material facts disclosed within those conversations, he's gonna have to share. But he did have a fiduciary duty to those clients as well. So
material facts, bar none, absolutely would have to disclose legally speaking. Folks, this is a little complex, and so let me help you out here. We really, from an agency point of view, classify everybody into one of two categories. You are a client or you are a customer. If you're a client, we owe you fiduciary duties. We're going to look after your best interests. If you're a customer, we are going to screw you over. Now, legally speaking, we say we owe you honesty, fairness, and disclosure of material facts as a customer. But here's what you may or may not realize, folks. Your clients, as soon as you're done, turn back into customers. Even if you close a transaction, right? You sold their house, you keep up with them, you send them postcards, you check in on them, they're still a customer until they hire you again. And so what happens is when you have a relationship with somebody and it ends, we would never go out of our way to hurt that person and share their secrets just in general, even if they fired us. But once you have an agency agreement with a new person and your allegiance has changed, now we're dealing with a client versus a customer. And you would be expected to share customer confidential information with your new client. So we're not going to share your secrets with the world with other customers, but once we have a buyer client who is interested in your property, we would have to share it if we knew it, even though it was told to us when we were your agent. It's just the way it works. Now, if you were ever in a random circumstance, can't imagine why you'd be in this circumstance, but where you sign an NDA with your client, obviously that would supersede this. But under your fiduciary duties and the common law of agency, when your loyalties change, it's kind of the way it works. I think this is the last video. Pretty sure. Here you go.
Thanks for calling the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. How may I help you?
After meeting with my CPA, they suggested I set up an LLC for my real estate business. I created an entity with the Secretary of State and submitted a request for a firm license that I was trying to obtain for compensation only. I accidentally put the BIC of my current firm as the BIC of my LLC. How do I fix this mistake?
Pretty generic question. I was filling out some paperwork on the commission's website. I accidentally put the wrong information in there. How do I fix this mistake? What you thinking, Teresa? Oh, you're muted.
Contact the Secretary of State's office that issued the firm license, or if there is a form on the commission's website for an amendment, maybe?
Yeah, there you go. Let's go to that second one. She apparently didn't do anything wrong on the Secretary of State paperwork. That's all fine. But when she was applying for the firm license and putting the paperwork on the commission's website, that's when she made a mistake. Folks, the North Carolina Real Estate Commission has a lot of forms. All the forms are digital. They're also what we would call smart or dynamic forms, which means as you answer questions, more questions will appear or disappear as necessary. And every single form also interacts with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission's database. So that kind of scrubs information to make sure that things go fine. Now, if you make a mistake, you do not need to call the commission. You do not need to email the commission, because every single form is acted on independently by commission staff members. So all you have to do is submit a new form, and if the old information was put on, when the new one comes through, it'll be corrected, just like that. And if the commission ever needs additional information, they'll ask for it. Case in point, folks, while I've been doing these videos, I have an email from the commission for a course I just submitted for approval. She just emailed, she said, I need this, this, and this. If they need something from you, they'll reach out. But you can always just resubmit the form and it'll correct it. Word of caution on the forms. A lot of people get confused here. No, number one, sometimes there's things that pop up that you have to handle for them to go through, like fees. They'll say, hey, we got your form, but it's not going to finalize until you submit your fee or your payment or whatever. So always pay attention to pop-ups and the notes that you get there. But the most commonly utilized form day in and day out is Form 2.08. Some of you may or may not have licensees underneath you. Form 2.08 would be how you affiliate a new licensee with you. It does three things: activation, affiliation, and activation and affiliation. If you are a full broker sole proprietor that wanted to activate their own license, Form 2.08. If you're a broker in charge and want to affiliate a new licensee underneath you, Form 2.08. If you leave a firm and go to another firm, and the way you affiliate with a new firm is Form 2.08. The problem is, folks, this does not terminate an affiliation. So if you're with ABC Realty and you leave and go to XYZ Realty, and the new BIC, or you, whoever, fills out Form 2.08, if it's a full broker, they'll now be duly affiliated with both. And in order to end the other affiliation, you would have to fill out Form 2.22. That is the termination of affiliation form. And please be aware the commission requires that any changes in affiliations, names, address, so on and so forth, have to be disclosed to the commission within 10 days. So if you leave a firm and move over and you don't tell them within 10 days, you're potentially in violation of commission rules. One last really big word of caution here that kind of came into play, and this may or may not strike you in a certain way. Folks, the broker in charge designation form is Form 2.25. And so if you're the BIC of an office right now and you're leaving, you would never fill out Form 2.22 because that's a termination form. If you terminate the current BIC and there's no BIC in place, your firm doesn't exist or your office doesn't exist, which is a very bad day because it has to have a BIC. So when you fill out Form 2.25, it'll automatically kick out the old BIC. So if you're retiring, don't do the termination, fill out Form 2.25, so the new BIC comes in, kicks out the old BIC, and that way it was never BIC-less, as we like to say. It's something that has happened in the past, and folks, one of the weird things that we may or may not talk about, the commission actually has a stance that if you're going on vacation where you're inaccessible, you should appoint a temporary BIC of your office because you have to provide active and direct supervision. So same thing too, if you're gone for 2 weeks in Cabo, you should appoint somebody else as the new BIC using Form 2.25 and then just appoint yourself when you come back. Never terminate the BIC. That would leave the office as nothing. I think it's going to have some crazy music. Bam, 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 bam. Folks, you're all winners in my book. Hopefully you learned some fantastic things from the frequently asked questions from the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Let's get into your next fun-filled discussion, which is the laws and rules update. Now, folks, here's the thing. The two sections you skipped, let me give you the quick rundown as I get this pulled up. One was on permits, which, in my opinion, that section is a little anyway, because permitting is very local in nature. There is no one-size-fits-all. There is, of course, statewide building code, but there's also local building codes and permitting on every single municipality. There's 100 counties in North Carolina and over 522 individual municipalities. That's a lot. So the permitting one is only so useful. It's always best to rely on a professional to understand if you need a permit or not. The other one that you skipped over is how to keep your license current and active. Hopefully you all know that as BICs. Folks, if you ever let your license go inactive or expired as a BIC or BIC eligible broker, you lose your BIC eligibility and you would have to get it back by meeting the same criteria again. So this section that we're skipping to is laws and rules changes. Now, spoiler alert, folks, there is not a lot of law and rule changes. Well, let me get the introductory slide. It's going to play the music first. Skip. There was not a lot of law and rule changes that are super significant that we have to teach you about this update course. But we still are going to talk about things that kind of relate to the real estate industry, even though they're not directly licensed law and commission rules. But I'm going to tell you right now, okay, this is one thing that I would suggest to you folks, if you're not up on this. There is a lot of proposed rule changes happening right here, right now, at the Real Estate Commission level. And they sent out an email if you're on the mailing list for it. If you're not on the mailing list, let me show you something cool. If you go to, I'm going to pull up my website here, because I think this is probably more important from a laws and rules consideration than what I'm actually about to teach you. So if you go to the Real Estate Commission's website, folks, ncrec.gov, if you're not on their mailing list, here's what you do. You go down to the bottom and you click right here, subscribe to the Commission's mailing list to receive notice of rulemaking, rule changes, additions, deletions. But right here, you can see everything that's coming down the pipeline. It means the Commission has already had discussions on it. It means these are laws and rule changes that they're moving forward with. And there is a public hearing on the 19th. This is where the general public is allowed to come and speak their piece. You can get on their docket and you can say, yay, I'm all for this, or nay, I'm not. And you can tell them why. It always has to have a public discussion period. And so you can join via Zoom, or it's in person in, where is it? High Point University in High Point, North Carolina. But they are changing things with education. There is discussion on changing the agency agreements and disclosure rule. There was discussion on changing 58A.0112, which is the sales contract rule. But that one I think is going to be a later discussion. And then, of course, this one's big for you. It's going to be a separate administrative hearing, discussions on changing the BIC laws and rules. Not a bad idea to keep up on these things, folks, because these affect you. And if you don't go to the public comment period and you don't speak your piece, and they get passed, you can't be mad at anybody but ourselves, right? Because if we don't show up and voice our opinions, then they won't be heard. So not a whole lot of laws and rule changes on our end last year, but there's a lot coming down the pipeline. So just keep that in mind. Now, in this section, folks, the game is called You Be the Judge. Yet again, something the commission came up with. And so there's going to be different scenarios, and you're going to answer questions as the judge on what you think about these scenarios. So here's your introductory video to this section.
It's time to play. You be the judge. This section does not need a scorekeeper. After each case study are a series of questions on which students need to make a ruling. Correct rulings are awarded 100 points. Each student will need a piece of scrap paper to keep their own score. Students with the most points are recognized at the conclusion of the game. Let's play.
So, as I said, fun little game here. I'm going to deal with some of the big changes that happen, not necessarily license laws, commission rules, but still affecting our industry. And some of them more than others. Here is your first one, dealing with the RPODs. So here is your scenario.
Jane, a listing agent, represented Tom, the seller client. Tom completed the Residential Property and Owners Association Disclosure Statement, RPODs, and checked no representation for all the questions except for 2 questions in Section E, land zoning. Tom answered yes on the RPODs to the following questions. E5, does the property abut or adjoin any private roads or streets? And E6, if there is a private road or street adjoining the property, are there any owners association or maintenance agreements dealing with the maintenance of the road or street? Jane reviewed the RPODs and did not ask additional questions about the private road or maintenance agreements. Further, when Jane listed the property, she failed to include information about the private road and maintenance agreement in the property description and public remarks section of the Multiple Listing Service, MLS. John, an unrepresented prospective buyer, placed an offer on Tom's property and Tom accepted. The parties went under contract and John closed on the property 5 weeks later. After closing, John was made aware of the private road and maintenance agreement by his neighbors at a community gathering. In regard to the conduct of Jane.
So this one is actually multiple choice. So here are your answer choices. Take a look. Tell me what you think here. And it doesn't have to be formal. You can just put it in the chat. You can just blurt it out. What letter? Yeah. I'm leaning towards y'all with B as well, folks. Jane has violated her duty to discover and disclose. Folks, I want you to understand what's happening here. Okay, we got unrepresented buyers, but that's irrelevant because we told you material facts disclosure we owe to who? Everybody in the club getting tipsy. And so this is something that she had a reasonable expectation to ascertain and disclose, regardless of how thorough the seller was or was not. As I told you, the doctrine of caveat emptor North Carolina does not require sellers to disclose anything. They just can't lie. They can't commit fraud. And so this licensee was in trouble for not disclosing what would be considered material facts. Now, folks, the RPODs has been a long change and an arduous process. And here's why. The Residential Property Disclosure Act is part of North Carolina General Statute 47. It is actual North Carolina law. And so changing the RPODs required legislative reform, which is cumbersome. And so they started changing the RPODs, but then it didn't get passed and they had to go through the General Assembly. And it's my understanding now that they have revised General Statute 47 that allows the commission to update the RPODs form at will. They no longer have to go through legislative reform. Does that really matter for you or I? No, just a fun little factoid. But they changed it, and so the format's a little bit different. They've added in certain categories like flood status, historic designations and registrations, private well testings, elevator systems. But everything's basically the same, just a slightly different flow. And then, of course, in the real estate education world, we joke and we call it the Scantron, because now it's got like little bubbles, because you're just like filling out a test. You're like, oh, do I need a number 2 pencil? Right? Is the machine going to recognize it if I don't? But it basically works the exact same. Nothing too crazy there. And of course, as I said, it rolled out officially in May of last year, but it was required for all of us to start using it in July 1st of last year. So hopefully we're all using the new one. Now, our obligations as real estate brokers has not changed. Every seller is still required to provide this in most real estate transactions. The seller has to be the one filling it out. We can help advise them, but we can't fill it out for them. Of course, it is every licensee's responsibility to facilitate getting this to the buyer client before they make an offer. And of course, there are still the protections. If the buyer does not receive this or the MOG before they make an offer and they get under contract, they would have 3 days to terminate the contract with no penalty of forfeiture of due diligence money. So those protections and everything still exist. Nothing's really changed with our obligations. Just the form has changed a little bit. Now, I'm going to tell y'all a really funny secret about the education world. You ready for this? There are some times in the education world that we have to ramble about nonsensical things so we can work out the timing so that we can take our breaks exactly when we want to take them. And that's currently what I'm doing, because as opposed to starting a video, I've just rambled until now it's 11:49. I can send you on break. You're welcome. Go take a break. Come back at 12. Whoop, whoop.